We're going to finish on a high, and our last visionary keynote. Before you all disappear, I want to make sure you get there to the site visit on time and in budget. So if you could just not run away until I've made sure you've got instructions, because I don't want you to head off to the airport knowing that your bags are sitting here. I'd like to make sure you're fully aware of the organisation to get you from here to the site, around the site visit, onto the bus, to the airport, and out of my face. Okay, if I could ask for our final visionary keynote. This is Johan, and he's speaking to us from IBM. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Ekesioo is the second name, that's hard to pronounce. I was thinking of trying to get some perspective of from a business side, and then conclude at the end from the data center side of what's really driving it, because the data center has no purpose unless there is really serving the business side. And there are lots of things driving, and lots of exciting things coming out of the possibilities in this very fast changing world. First of all, and we heard a little bit about that, it's the global integration within companies, which is of course driven by standard processes, the bandwidth, etc. And it's pretty amazing. I don't know whether you've done it, but a couple of months ago I did order a new iPad. You do it at 10 o'clock a Monday evening. You can get your own engravement on it because you want to have it personalized. And you have it shipped to you on Wednesday, produced in China. Then you globally integrate into one part. Then the delivery company calls to say, we have this iPad and we can come either in the morning or the afternoon. It's a little bit more to do because you want to have it delivered 11:10. And that's perfectly doable if the delivery company had really taken some of all the data that would be available and produced a new application for that. That would drive lots of servers, network, data center. Totally possible. Because what's happening, and we heard a little bit about that, with all those billion of devices, that's what we call the instrumented world, the millions and billions of mobile phones, mobile cameras. Through the great interconnection, we heard from Telia, and just going back a couple of years ago, today, bandwidth and the cost of bandwidth is not hindering new solutions, nor, which we also heard, the placement of data centers. But what you do with all this data? I mean, you have to do something intelligent out of it. And I'm going to give you some examples of what we see, some that are real, some that perhaps not are working yet. Just an example of the big change. It's been mentioned by some, but this is a 4 years difference between Beijing and London. I don't know, how many of you do tweets? Okay, there are more people in the world than in this room doing it, because back in Beijing, 4 years ago, there was about 6 million users. Today, we have about 500 million. So what, you say? Back then, it was around 300 tweets. Now, it was 400 million a day. 83 times more users, but the interesting thing, which is driving the business for Neil and TeliaSonera and the international carrier, is that the number of tweets went up 1,300 times. So what you say? That's just 140 signs of some sentences. But what if, and the London transport system started to do some analysis of this. So they could actually, they weren't fully doing this yet, but it would be possible, just analyzing those and see which events in the tweets, because it wasn't sold out everywhere, get high remarks, they could expect the next day that there will be more people coming to that. Then you start to get something intelligent out of all this massive information. And that, of course, drives the need for networks, computing, storage, etc. Just a small example, I'm going to get back to some others. We already heard much about this, so I'm not going to dwell on it, all the social media, all that is. But the interesting thing is how that could be used in the corporate side as well as on the consumer side. But then don't underestimate this enormous amount of information that's coming out from all those smart meters, RFIDs. I mean, you heard they could be placed in a turkey, and they can. And it's not perhaps today, but you see it in a couple of years, because cost of it going down. And then you could ask what's the value of it. You heard some before, and I'm going to take some other examples. So this is really exploding, and this is all what is called this big data, as were mentioned of some of the speakers in the last part of the discussion. And this is going to change so much more on how we do things, how we predict things, how companies are going to act, how we're going to act as consumers. So, as old as I am, there was an old Canadian group called Back on Turner Overdrive that wrote a song called You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, and that's still valid. And I think it's another important thing which one also has to think on when constructing centers, and really when you equip them with all the storage stuff. There is so much data out there. We have all this volume data that's coming from transactions. It could be large transaction systems in the banks, in the industries, all the social media, etc. Then it's a very, very fast expanding of this so-called data in motion, the streaming. I mean, if you go down to, just take the subway in Stockholm, you wonder why? And after a while I started to do it myself. I watched some streaming, and I watched the news, so I do that. Did you do that 3-4 years ago? No. Will you do it more in the next 5? Absolutely. A lot more, and a lot more targeted on it as well. But that's on the consumer side. If you just go back to, it's pretty interesting, if you remember when London is probably one of the most populated cities in the world of public cameras. So they really can track everything if they want. And if you remember how they could track when they actually caught one of those, he didn't do any attack, but a presumed terrorist, by really tracking through all this massive informational data that were through the video cameras, could track this guy, how he had traveled the London subway system, and then connect that with information after facial recognitions going into whatever systems they had to recognize who is that guy, and they actually could catch him. Then you start to get some really, really new, interesting applications. Some might think that Orwell is really here, and he is. And like it or not, but 1984 we already passed it. And it's going to be, depends on what you see, better or worse, but it's going to be there anyway. And of course you have to take all this data in forms. And then there's another thing that's going to be very important, that's actually going to drive lots of capacity in analyzing of this so-called veracity. That means the truthfulness. How true is the data? So can I really take some decisions out of it or not? Combining all those three. And I'm going to give some examples of this. This is from the US. They are a little bit more ahead compared to where we are in Europe in the retail industry. Some might recognize this as a Target sign. That's a large US retailer. There was a father in Minnesota. He browsed through the mail one morning and saw that his daughter had gotten a number of coupons for baby wear. and she was in high school. So he went into the local Target store pretty annoyed, saying, how can you send this to my daughter? Do you try to encourage her to get pregnant? And the store manager, of course, he really didn't know anything about that, and said, sorry about this, I don't know what's happened. And the store manager 2 weeks later called the father again and said that, really sorry about this, I just want to make my apologies once more time. And then the father said that, I had a talk with my daughter, and it seems that things happened in my house that I didn't was aware of. So what had Target done? They had really started to understanding the buying behavior of an individual before, I mean, the father had seen it was in the 8th month, hopefully. But seeing some buying behaviors, and I'm not going to go through that, in the way of how you start very early on buying magnesium pills, zinc pills, then at the very, very early stage, starting to buy unscented lotions, unscented soap, and some other stuff. And then knowing if I can target someone with interesting promotions early on, then I can capture quite a lot of that instead of once she's given birth. Ethic or not, I don't judge, but possible. And then what they are trying to do right now is combining their own buying information, looking into, and this is starting to where you have the individual privacy, of combining that with Facebook and with the number there and Facebook. It's totally possible that you connect individuals at Target on what they're doing on Facebook. And you could start to imagine of applications and new things you can do. That's going to drive a lot network, storage, processing power. And interesting too is that the CMOs, the Chief Marketing Officer, is starting to be one of the more heavy IT spenders right now. Because this doesn't just go to consumer industry, this goes also into the business to business, etc. And talking about the business to business, I don't know whether you know about Vestas. Vestas being a Danish company, they're producing windmills. They are very far advanced in really combining all information. They have sensors in all their windmills around the globe. They collect that constantly, that information. They combine that with lots of meteorological data, and they're starting to get a learning system on where is really a couple of things. First, where is the optimal places then of the knowledge they have from where they have all those windmills with meteorological data, where to place new windmill farms. And they can do much more precise work on that today compared just to a couple of years ago, and they will be even more precise in a couple of years. And another thing they're doing now is that since they collect all this data, they know when to do preventive maintenance. But of course you don't want to do preventive maintenance at the same time when the wind blows at the best speed for the windmill. So they combine, knowing that they have a window of perhaps 30 days of doing that, combine it with meteorological data, knowing that this day there is actually no wind, most likely anyway, the prediction is. So then I send out my technician. That makes them having an advantage towards competition, since the windmill producer doesn't lose those good days that the company that doesn't have that information does. It was mentioned before, I think you mentioned about the Floyd, American car. And cars are so data intense, so software intense today. And they all have GPSs, they are connected. That was probably on the weather report this morning in Helsinki, that driving up to Kajaani, you will probably have slippery roads. Good information if you're going to drive 550 k's. I mean, you might be cautious for 550 k's, and that's fine. Kilometers. But think if that when I've driven 440 kilometers, I get a message in the car saying that, alert, it's going to be very icy in 2 kilometers. Is it possible? Of course it's possible. There are anti-slip system in the cars, so the cars passing that point will recognize that. They will record it. It's going to be sent over whatever network, probably not a fixed one, but and you're going to get the information into your car before you hit that to really slippery pace of the road. Doesn't really exist today, but it's very, very likely that it will in a couple of years, because it really raises safety in driving a lot. You could think of another thing here where driving into, probably not Kajaani, when I looked out the window and I walked this morning, I didn't see that much of a traffic jam, and I talked to some of the locals yesterday that there was pretty tough traffic between 7:55 and 8 in the morning. But just go to Helsinki, Stockholm, New York, or any of those places, think of that when you were driving into town, might live in one of the suburbs outside. And this morning it comes, anyway in Stockholm, is that there are large billboards, electronic billboards on all the roads into the city. That today, when you pass that sign, it's actually going to take you 15 minutes to get into the center of the city instead of normally 15. And there is a commuter train leaving from the next exit, and there are parking space free, and it will take you to the city in 15 minutes. Totally possible to do, because of you can study the traffic flow, you have all the GPSs in the cars, you have predictive data of how normal traffic actually some days make terrible traffic jams, other days it doesn't. Unless you have an unprecedented crash, then it's hard to do it. But this is totally possible. It doesn't exist, but I'm sure we're going to see much more of that in the cities. And that's, of course, then going to drive lots of the aspects that we talked about. That's, at the end, going to reside in the data center to make that possible. So we're really moving from an era of process-oriented, and it's still going to be there, to much more information and cognitive. That is, cognitive is that I can predict, I can adapt, I can really understand what is going to happen in the future from all those aspects, and I just gave some few examples of it. That's one area that's going to drive it. I'm 100%, I mentioned in the panel. All those underutilized services with all those cloud technologies, etc., also going to drive a lot into those large new centers. Because the CAPEX, and I heard from a CIO that's worked at an industrial company in the production line that came to another more service-oriented company, I don't want to mention the name, and then he looked into the data center and looked at the utilization, which was roughly at 40% of their CAPEX investment. And you don't run a production line at 40% usage of CAPEX. There's also going to be a big change in this called software as a services, because you're going to be able to deploy new applications in a much faster way, and you need to do that because you sit on the legacy. So those data centers, they're going to be equipped, and it's very important to understand what they're going to be equipped with, really much more systems that are designed for data that are cloud enabled, and also that's going to be more task oriented in the way of doing more analytics, etc. So the requirements are going to go up on number of processing hours, etc., etc. So even though they shrink and get smaller and smaller, but it's going to be enormous large demand, I think, and we think, of the processing power that relates over to a number of machines, etc. And all those aspects, and I'm not going to go through them, but that's going to be crucial, because when you look at it from a data center, and I think we heard a little bit from Google of that, you really have to look at both the physical facilities as well as all the systems in it. They really go hand in hand around lots of this. and it's going to be driven lots about the energy, but extremely much about automation. And you don't want to have any people in there, because as I said, one of the largest reasons for failures are people, and you can do so much more with automation now. And through the automation, you also manage to get much higher utilization of all the equipment that you have installed. I'm not going to dwell on this, but we've taken our pill on it, so we reduced from hundreds, 140 data centers or something around the globe, to 7. So it's possible with communication today. It's not 1, it will never be 1, but we are at 7 from 155. And then there's the other aspects that I'll go through here. So we get some good knowledge that we now have put into Kajaani, because I think this is a really thrilling site. We think it's thrilling, and we do it with a number of partners, Permanite being one, and then a couple of others as well. And really, and we're going to go down and see it, and I'm excited myself because I haven't seen it myself yet. Making sure that this is high class, really, really modern, because it has to be at the extreme modern level in order to be competitive now, when you get all these servers, storage, switches, etc. into it. So this Spectrum one, it has all the capabilities of delivering what you need from a modern infrastructure. Then it has to be loaded with clients, and I'm looking forward to get a mail, not from Target, because I don't think they're going to be here, but from somewhere else from this region, of a promotional mail that has been produced and analyzed here from the Kajaani Center. So thank you, and looking forward to a great tour. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to draw things to an end.